4 years ago, Colin, the wealthy heir, fell in love with me at first sight. After 3 years of his relentless pursuit, I finally gave in. In the first year after we confirmed our relationship, he started pressing for marriage. I hesitated, but in the end, I couldn't resist his persistence. Eventually, I brought him home to meet my parents, but outside the private room that day, I overheard one of his friends asking, "Since you've already met her parents, when's the wedding?" Colin smacked his lips, speaking unhurriedly. Suddenly, "I don't feel like getting married anymore." Someone teased beside him, "Don't pretend. You chased this so-called unattainable flower for 3 years. Are you really willing to give her up?" Unattainable flower? I heard him scoff. "If you saw how her parents treated her, you'd think the same as I do." The same? What do you mean? The same, that she's nothing special after all. Chapter 1. When Colin's message came in, I was helping one of my graduate students review a paper. The chime from my phone broke my furrowed focus. "Come pick me up." Just a few concise words, completely unlike Colin's usual way of speaking. Normally, when he talked to me, he would explain everything clearly, giving emotional reassurance. Afraid that I might misunderstand or feel upset, I sent him a question mark. Could it be another one of those ridiculous truth or dare games his friends love to play? "Wife, we're about to get married. Can't you come pick up your dear husband? Everyone else's wife comes for them." Husband? I guess so. After he met my parents, the wedding talks had taken another step forward. Life as two people wasn't the same as being alone. It was normal to adjust. "Fine," I sighed. I shut my laptop and grabbed my car keys. The storm was heavy today, and I kept hitting red lights. By the time I arrived, more than an hour had passed. I shook off my umbrella, handed it to the doorman, and followed the usher toward the 5th-floor private room. "Thanks. I can manage." Colin's longtime habit whenever he dined here. He always chose the innermost room on the 5th floor. I knew the way by heart. Just as I was about to knock on the door, I heard Colin's friend ask, "It's raining today. Why didn't you go pick up your wife after work?" Colin sipped his wine. Dismissive. "Pick her up for what? It's not like she doesn't know the way." Someone teased, "Oh, now that you've nearly got her, you can drop the act?" Others joined in. "Didn't you meet her parents last month? So when's the wedding?" With a thud, Colin set his glass down, his face impatient. "What wedding? We'll see." The room went silent. Quinn couldn't hold back and broke the stillness first. "Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean we'll see? Did she dump you?" Colin raised an eyebrow. "When have you ever seen me get dumped?" A woman's indifferent voice cut in. "You've never shown consistent interest in any woman for 3 years straight. You've never chased anyone for more than 3 months. You never talk about marriage with any woman. There are too many things you've never done, yet for Paula, you broke every record. So if she dumped you, it wouldn't be impossible." Laughter filled the room, mixed with mocking words toward the young Master Coup. "Enough." Quinn's face turned stern as he hushed them, looking straight at Colin Coup. "So what's going on? Her parents didn't approve of you?" "No." Colin smacked his lips again. Unhurriedly, "It's me. I suddenly don't feel like getting married." Gasps filled the room. Quinn curled his lips into a smile. "Don't pretend. You chased this unattainable flower for 3 years. You're really willing to let her go?" "Unattainable flower?" Colin scoffed. "If you saw how her parents treated her, you'd feel the same as I do." "The same? The same what?" "The same, that she's nothing special after all." Chapter 2. Just as I stepped into the Research Institute building, the security guard at the entrance naturally asked me, "Working overtime again? Mr. Coup didn't come to pick you up?" 4 years ago, when Colin began pursuing me, he became a regular visitor to the institute. His presence was something everyone had gotten used to. Suddenly, I remembered the words I had overheard outside the private room earlier. "I just think there's no need to keep putting her on a pedestal. Other women can humble themselves, why can't she?" I nodded slightly. I drove today, planning to go upstairs and take another look at a graduate student's thesis. The guard gave me a knowing smile. He remembered there were still a few students inside who were struggling to graduate. A colleague passing by spoke in a puzzled tone. That's rare. Ever since your relationship became official, it's been unusual to see you working late. No one nagging you today? Graduation season, the colleague chuckled, shaking his head at himself in self-mockery. Thinking of the few students under him who were having trouble publishing, he walked away, looking a little dejected. But my students were different. Their theses didn't really have any problems. I simply wanted them to be as polished as possible. And, at the same time, I wanted some quiet. Chapter 3. By the time I got home, it was already 1 in the morning. Before my hand even touched the light switch, someone grabbed me around the waist. Colin pinned me against the wall, his body reeking of alcohol. The smell so strong it made me instinctively turn my head away. Why didn't you come pick me up? His tone was aggrieved, deliberately laced with a sobbing edge. His grip around my waist tightened, pulling me closer to him. His stance was more forceful than usual. The rain was too heavy, the road too long. It would have taken me a long time to walk alone. His lips brushed against my ear, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident. In the darkness, between the two of us who once fit seamlessly together, a wall rose swiftly. I remember you're good at driving. What's a little rain to be afraid of? And then he kissed me, heated and domineering. Reason shattered. I was swept away by the physical pleasure. By the time I came back to myself, both Colin and I had shed our clothes. Falling onto the bed, he pulled me up suddenly, forcing me to straddle him. You do it. Colin had always been the service-oriented type. Ever since we'd been together, he always put in effort in bed. At one point, I even suspected he had taken some sort of professional training at a club. He often repeated the same phrase at my ear. Paula, leave it all to me. I'll make you happy. I had never hired a male escort, but I doubted they would be much better than Colin. Take the lead myself? It wasn't impossible. I looked at him, from the powerful muscles of his thighs, to his 8-pack abs, then his broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, before finally meeting his gaze. His dark eyes gleamed with a predator's certainty, the urge to tame, as if I were prey caught alone, arrogant and condescending. Suddenly, I felt utterly disinterested. I got up from the bed and walked toward the bathroom. Forget it. I'm too tired today. When I came back wrapped in a bathrobe, Colin was still in the same position. Seeing me approach, he gave a defiant jerk of his lower body, only to wince in pain and draw in a sharp breath. Can't you just serve me once? The buzzing of the hairdryer drowned his words. Seeing I didn't respond, Colin silently stood, dressed himself, and left. This was the first time since we'd met that he had ever left me behind alone. Chapter 4. My thoughts were a tangled mess. When the brain refuses to stop working, sleep never dares to come. I received a message from Quinn while I was lying in bed doing the diamond pose for stretching. He sent me several videos in a row, asking, Paula, you two are about to get married. What's he doing now? Aren't you going to stop him? I opened the videos, bright lights, loud music, the clinking of glasses, a nightclub. Colin was sunk into the sofa, his expression dark, the top buttons of his shirt undone carelessly. The hostess sitting beside him kept smiling and coaxing him for a long while before he finally lifted the corners of his lips. Master Ku, you haven't been here for a long time. Won't you drink a little more? That's right. Years since you last visited us. Tonight you have to open a few more bottles. Colin lifted his eyes, looking at the hostess with calculated leisure. Well, that depends on whether you have the ability. Swiping down, the second video showed a blonde hostess holding wine in her mouth, kneeling half on the sofa, leaning toward Colin Ku. The sound of chanting rose one after another. Master Ku, Master Ku, Master Ku. I watched as Colin, under the chorus of voices, leaned forward, taking in the wine mouth to mouth from the girl, sip by sip. When the wine was gone, he still wasn't satisfied. He grabbed the girl's face, biting and sucking at her lips hard. Scrolling further down, I didn't know what had happened, but in the video Colin looked furious. She's not good enough. There are plenty of women who'd be willing. After that, he pulled the blonde girl into the bathroom of the club's private room, while the people around exchanged uneasy glances. He's gone too far this time. I tried to stop him, but you'd better get over here quickly. Chapter 5. I turned off my phone. In the darkness, The only sound was my own breathing. I thought back to when Colin and I had just made our relationship official, and he invited me to a dinner with his friends. It was the first time he ever brought me to meet them. Beforehand, I saw him typing and deleting, drafting several versions of a meeting etiquette note in their group chat. The moment I appeared, teasing voices filled the room. Master Ku always mentioned you at every gathering. 3 years, it's about time we finally saw the real you. No wonder she's the real girlfriend, such elegance. Sis-in-law, Master Ku only listens to you. From now on, please stop him from bullying me. Some people enthusiastically shipped us as a couple on the spot, while others, too drunk, blurted out his history. Don't know how long you'll keep him tied down. His last relationship only lasted 3 days. The one before that, just 8 hours. Miss Paula, a red-haired man slurred his words before someone clamped a hand over his mouth. That night, I got an emergency call and left early. I later heard that after the gathering, Colin beat the redhead until his nose and face were swollen, his skin and hair the same color. Because he had hit too hard, the group had to carry the red-haired man to the hospital. That was the first, and also the last, time I ever saw him. When Colin came back, he swore over and over again, "Paula, I really was reckless before, and my reputation wasn't great. But don't worry, I've changed. You're not like the others. With you, I'm absolutely serious, and I'll stay devoted." He knelt halfway on the floor, raising 3 fingers in a solemn oath. His expression was uneasy, his clenched fists trembling slightly. I smiled faintly and helped him up. He was making a big deal out of nothing, it was just dating. After all. Chapter 6. The next day, the internal line rang to tell me someone was waiting for me downstairs. I put down the documents in my hand and hurried down, only to find it was Colin's mother. She was dressed in an indigo suit, sitting on the sofa, occasionally touching the Mikimoto pearls by her ear, looking somewhat impatient. The moment I came into her sight, she frowned, as if she had seen something improper. "Why are you so slow?" As expected, she went straight to the point, talking about marriage. "What's your situation?" "Back then, Colin told us that after meeting your parents, he would come back and set the wedding date. It's been 3 months now, and there's still nothing." She dragged out her voice in that pretentious socialite tone. "Could it be that your family has some objection to ours?" I leaned my chair back a little and smiled faintly. "These things are all arranged by Colin. I don't interfere." She rolled her eyes in what she thought was an elegant manner and pursed her lips. "Old Mr. Ku even said Colin marrying you was his blessing. But I think he'd be better off finding a proper wife, gentle, devoted, and not so restless, someone who could take care of him. With you, it seems you don't even know how to share his burdens." I still smiled politely, nodded, but didn't respond. Finding it boring, she left without even saying goodbye. Chapter 7. Colin always talked about marriage. At first, Mrs. Ku was displeased, saying her son must have lost his mind after choosing among so many girls. He ended up picking the wrong one. Later, when Ku Group's newly launched AI business ran into problems, I stepped in, first, to help Ku Group out of their crisis. Second, to give my students a solid project experience before graduation. I brought my students to Ku Group's headquarters, working overnight to solve the urgent issue for old Mr. Ku. After that, probably under his father's warning, even though she disapproved, Mrs. Ku didn't dare interfere openly. But when she saw her son, who had been enthusiastically preparing for the wedding, suddenly fall silent, she assumed the problem must have come from me and rushed over to accuse me. It had been 3 months since Colin met my parents. In that time, he had never again mentioned marriage. The wedding planner who had once eagerly sent me proposal after proposal, our chat box had gone quiet. The $1 million wedding dress Colin had promised never appeared. I thought to myself, 3 months was about long enough. Chapter 8. Quinn's concern over Colin's changes was excessive. Thanks to his relentless updates, I knew Colin's every move during this period. He brought along a clingy, coquettish childhood sweetheart to drinking parties. In a game of truth or dare, their lips pressed together, kissing passionately and unwilling to part. At the end, he even added a line, "A woman like this, now that's real flavor." I remembered when he once begged me, asking if I could depend on him a little more. Not make him feel dispensable, but I couldn't. A person's past shapes their present. The dependency I had once dreaded like poison, and worked so hard to escape, how could I casually pick it back up? He also lingered in nightclubs with that same blonde woman from before. Sometimes she was smooth and sociable, sometimes sultry and flirtatious, and when Colin flew into a rage, she would soothe him with soft words. Paula, can't you just give in to me a little? We had once quarreled because of my constant overtime. Even after he laid out the stakes, I still carried on my own way. 3 days later, he showed up at the entrance of the institute, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble on his chin, blocking my way with a face full of grievance. And in the next second, he still took my bag gently and opened the car door for me. Back then, when we had just confirmed our relationship, passion was at its height. He sighed, like a man resigned to his fate. Paula, in this life, I guess I'm destined to be your dog. Chapter 9. Outside the nightclub. In the early hours, Colin came out, his tie loose, yawning, his face showing a hint of boredom. A blonde girl loosely clung to his arm, her eyes carrying a forced liveliness and a professional smile. Their steps were hesitant, as if uncertain about what to do next. Colin pulled out his phone, glanced at it, a trace of loneliness flickering across his face before he shoved it back into his pocket. Because of that message, company meeting, I'll be back late, still unanswered. Seeing the two of them about to leave, I raised my arm and called out loudly, Colin! Afraid that if I delayed, this matter would drag on even longer. Colin froze, hurriedly trying to pull his arm free. Then, as if realizing something, he stopped abruptly, pretending to stay calm. His eyes locked on me, not letting a single expression slip by. The blonde girl was an experienced professional. She had seen all kinds of scenes. Seeing Colin's arm remain still, she didn't let go. Instead, her smile only grew sweeter. When I didn't react, Colin suddenly shook off her hand and looked at me coldly. Entertaining clients. What are you doing here? Without waiting for my answer, he turned his head and told the girl to leave first. After she walked away, he came over and stared straight at me. I knew he was waiting for me to bring up the wedding, so I let the smile fade from my face. Looking at him coldly, cancel the wedding. The cigarette Colin had just bitten slipped from his mouth and dropped to the ground with a snap. Chapter 10. Paula, don't be ridiculous. Why say something so harsh? He was no longer the calm, indifferent man he had been in recent weeks. His hands shook as he tried to grab me, but I sidestepped. On the empty street at dawn, there was only the sound of the wind. I don't like the smell of smoke. What? I never liked the smell of smoke or alcohol. Every time our home was filled with it, my father would fly into a rage. Later, when I met Colin, he pursued me relentlessly. Downstairs at my office building, outside my apartment complex, he always leaned against some flashy car, cigarette in hand, trying to look cool. Miss Paula, would you give me the honor of getting to know you? After flicking away the cigarette butt, he strode toward me wrapped in the thick stench, wearing a wool coat. I frowned, taking a step back. Mr. Koo, I don't like smokers. From that moment on, I never saw Colin smoke again, until 3 months ago. After meeting my parents, that's when he started smoking again. It was as if he suddenly understood what I meant. He pulled out the pack of cigarettes from his pocket and hurled it far away. Then I won't smoke anymore. I don't like your mother either, just like she doesn't like me. I don't like flashy, ostentatious love or lavish weddings. I don't like those friends of yours who only know how to make jokes at women's expense. Hearing this, Colin's lips began to tremble. At first, I just wanted to try dating. My friend said that going too long without a love life suppresses neurological development. When I agreed to be with you, my project had hit a dead end, and my hair was falling out in clumps. Then you showed up with a bouquet of roses. I looked at your face and thought, maybe I could give it a try. But now I think, marrying you, it's just not going to work. Let's break up. What followed was disgraceful. Disgraceful only on Colin's part. His voice trembled as he tried to win me back. When he saw I wasn't moved, his eyes turned vicious. Even your parents call you a whore. What could you possibly be worth? Paula, once you leave me, let's see who else would ever want you. Only a twisted family like yours could raise such a freak as you. Chapter 11. In my hazy childhood memories, our family once had happy times. My father was an entrepreneur. My mother well-educated. They were in harmony with each other, always regarded by outsiders as a model couple. Everything changed when I was 7. That year, my father visited his hometown and some old friends. He unexpectedly learned that the night he thought he had gotten drunk and slept with my mother by accident had actually been a setup, drugged by my uncle. The consequence of that one-night stand was my mother becoming pregnant and forcing marriage, leading my father to abandon his first love. Perhaps their marriage could have still worked. He could have accepted the mistake and carried on with a family that looked happy on the surface. But the worst part was that my father's first love had committed suicide after he married my mother. And when I was 7 years old, my father learned all of this. The infamous 7-year itch. By then, my mother had already been sleeping in my room for nearly a year. The woman who had once been his white moonlight became a ghost of resentment in our home, casting an impenetrable shadow over our family. At first, my mother still tried to persuade him gently. She said, "It's been so many years. You know how I've treated you. Don't tear this family apart." But my father's anger never faded, especially after being suppressed by my grandfather and uncle. His resentment only grew. Worn down by his torment, my mother lost all patience. She alternated between desperate pleas to stay together and vicious curses, her once gentle demeanor long gone. Over time, I became, in her words, the useless child who failed to help her keep my father. In my father's eyes, I became an accomplice dragging him into the mud. They didn't dare physically fight each other, so they took turns unleashing sarcasm, fists, and kicks on me. My bruises became their twisted relief, their victory over one another. At 13, I had my first period. The cramps left me writhing in bed, drenched in cold sweat. After hours of painful hesitation, I went to my mother for help. She sneered. How did I raise such a useless thing? Making a fuss over every little discomfort. This is exactly why your father doesn't want to come home. Enduring the pain, I called my father. On the other end of the line, silence lingered before his voice, cold as ice, replied, "Like mother, like daughter. You call a man about a girl's private matter? You're just like her. Cheap to the bone." That rainy night, I walked for a long time with an umbrella, searching for a pharmacy but never finding one. The wind was too strong. It blew my umbrella away. I was soaked through, the pain even sharper. My vision went black, then white, and when I woke again, I was in a hospital bed. My friend Gungchen sitting beside me. From admission to discharge, I never saw my parents, just like in the many years that followed. Chapter 12. It was into this background that Colin came home with me, so eager to get married. "Are you pregnant?" We had barely sat down when my father asked coldly. Colin looked uneasy. He thought my family was strict, and worried he had overstepped before marriage with their obedient daughter. Would he be thrown out? But before his cold sweat could even form, my father spoke again. "Young man, I advise you to be cautious. Sluts only have 2 ways to tie a man down, sex or pregnancy." Clinging shamelessly, the disgust on his face was undisguised. My mother's forced smile stiffened. "Today our daughter brought her fiancé home. Can't you?" "What fiancé?" My father turned to Colin. "You haven't even gotten the marriage certificate yet. There's still time to run. If you insist on marrying her, I won't ask for a bride price. Trash gives birth to trash. She won't fetch any real value anyway. She won't have any dowry either. I won't give a cent to someone like her." Since my grandfather's death, my uncle had been struggling to hold things together, with no one left to restrain him. My father had become even more reckless, his insults blunter than ever. After all, I was part of the family. Cursing me was also cursing my grandfather, my uncle, my mother. I ate quietly, my parents trading barbed words under the pretense of catching up, while Colin shifted uneasily in his seat. On the way back to the hotel, I held my cramping stomach, thinking my tolerance had weakened. Colin hadn't spoken since we left. When we were nearly at the hotel, he suddenly pulled me into his arms. "Paula, you still have me." My phone buzzed with a message. "Look at what you've done." The moment you came home, everything turned into chaos. If it weren't for you, your father and I would have reconciled long ago. Chapter 13. Old Mr. Koo invited me to his birthday banquet. Even if marriage was no longer on the table, he would never so easily give up networking with me, a leading figure in my field. Businessmen are nothing if not pragmatic. Naturally, Colin was there too, along with his circle of childhood friends. Old Mr. Ku's secretary came over and reminded me specially, "Professor Paula, if you need anything, you can call me anytime." She was afraid Colin might cause trouble. At first, Colin deliberately came over to exchange pleasantries, but I avoided him. Seeing my indifference, he clenched his teeth in frustration. At times, I almost pitied him for such a hot-tempered young master. Being with me must have felt suffocating. Luckily, soon enough, one of his clingy childhood sweethearts walked into the banquet hall, and she stuck to him without pause. Colin didn't push her away. Instead, he wrapped his arm around her waist and showered her with attentiveness, pouring her wine, draping his jacket over her shoulders, inviting her to the dance floor where they pressed body to body in a heated dance. Of course, I knew he was doing all of this deliberately for me to see, to remind me that I, too, could be neglected, trampled on. Not long ago we were engaged, and now the man was holding another woman in his arms. Under the eyes of so many onlookers, I simply lowered my gaze and sipped my wine quietly. After the host's toast, the time was about right. Leaving early would not be seen as impolite. I had just reached the door when his little sweetheart suddenly cried out, "My diamond hairpin is missing." "No one leaves." Colin, who had been watching me all along, blocked my way. "Something's lost. Stay and help us look." I glanced at the countless attendants in the hall, finding it absurd. The childhood sweetheart's brain was clearly muddled. She pointed a finger at me. She was rushing to leave. It must be her who took it. I looked straight at Colin Ku. "Does Mr. Ku think so too?" His eyes wavered. "Paula, you never replied to my messages." This pair of childhood sweethearts truly were well matched, both complete fools. At a high society banquet, they dared to publicly accuse a guest of theft, with no thought of disgracing the host. As expected, old Mr. Ku's secretary arrived swiftly, handled the situation efficiently, and then escorted me out. "Professor Paula, the driver is waiting outside, and the gift bag is already in the car. I sincerely apologize." Chapter 14. Quinn sent me another message. "Did you two break up?" I didn't reply, but then he showed up with flowers in hand. "Miss Paula, could I get to know you, with the intention of dating?" "Not interested. Please believe me. I'm sincere. I'm not like Colin." "How are you different? When you go to the club with your friends, they all order girls, and you don't. Is that it?" I had no time, nor any patience, to go through Colin 2.0 all over again. Chapter 15. Quinn hadn't been discreet. Colin found out about his pursuit of me. He came to my place, kicked away the bouquet that I had already planned to throw out, and tore up the card. On the card it said, "I am willing to change myself for you, until you see my sincerity." Colin was furious, asking me if it was because of someone else that I was wavering. "Paula, I believe I'm special to you. We've already made it as far as meeting each other's parents. As long as you nod, you'll be Mrs. Ku. She's nothing more than a fake unattainable flower. I'll grind her down until she becomes the perfect wife for me. By then, with cigarettes, drinks, and mistresses everywhere, she'll still have to put up with it. Once I poke holes in the condom and she's tied down with a child, where can she escape?" I repeated, word for word, what Colin had said that night in the private room. As my words fell, his face paled inch by inch. You heard all of that? Then even bad relationships need a withdrawal period." He began struggling again, looking pathetic and pitiful. I was just, you saw the hidden side of my family background and thought you could control me. Paula, have you ever scooped a cat's litter box?" The sudden shift in topic stunned Colin. His eyes went blank. "What?" "No matter how long cat waste sits in clean litter, it still has to be thrown out. You're like a piece of cat shit that stayed in my life for too long. Yes, you left behind some traces, made your presence felt, but once I'm certain you're the wrong existence, you have to go. When I met you, I knew you were promiscuous. Your history with women long. I accepted that, so I forgave the past. But now, as I give you up, I can also choose not to cling to the past." Colin began to cry, silently. without sound, only tears sliding down his sharply carved face. I really did plan to marry you. And then, at some later moment, contempt and disdain would rise in your heart again. Maybe when I'm bloated and weak during pregnancy. Maybe when I'm sick in bed, crying in pain, or maybe when I fail in my career advancement. In those moments, you wouldn't be able to stop yourself from thinking, she's nothing special. What's she so proud of? Maybe I shouldn't have chosen this woman. I can always find another outside and trample this wife's dignity. If even her parents can treat her like that, why shouldn't I? What's more terrifying than not being loved is being despised. Once contempt starts, it never stops. You'd begin to doubt whether the woman you clung to desperately, sacrificing your pride to win over, was ever worth it at all. And then you'd start to hate that I deceived you, hate that though I was flawed, I carried myself as untouchable, making you think the flower hid some rare treasure, when in fact it was only mud pretending to be a lotus. Before long, you would turn that hatred into action, pushing me deeper into the abyss every time I needed you most. The broken windows effect is the touchstone for testing petty men. And you, Colin, have been despicable from beginning to end. You failed the test. I had been estranged from my parents for years, giving me complete freedom to decide whether or not to bring him home to meet them. The reason I chose to do so was because I wanted to open my life to him, without holding anything back. It was an idealistic motive. I hoped that my future partner could accept all of me. I didn't want to lie beside someone I had to guard against every moment. Chapter 16. Colin was like a storm in my life. He came, and then he left. I returned to my usual days, doing research, guiding students, rushing projects. I hired a regular hourly housekeeper. The little inconveniences Colin's absence brought disappeared with her arrival. I rarely thought of him, until the institute director asked to speak with me. Professor Paula, I know your personal relationships are none of our business, but I watched the Koo boy grow up. Recently, he's been so heartbroken he's sinking into self-destruction. As elders, we can't bear to see it. For my sake, could you talk to him? Try to ease his mind? Colin's reputation had long been set. He fit the script of the useless second-generation heir. Even if he threw himself away now, it was just him returning to the same path. The director was an old friend of Mr. Koo. Most likely the Koo family had begged him, and he couldn't refuse. Whether I could persuade Colin, he wasn't confident at all. That was why, when I appeared at the Koo residence, everyone wore a look of shock. What are you doing here? Shut up. Old Mr. Koo pulled Mrs. Koo away, leaving space for just Colin and me. Colin had drunk heavily, lying like a heap of mud on the floor. When I arrived, old Mr. Koo had been scolding him. Colin gave no reaction, but when the room suddenly quieted, he lifted his eyelids to glance at me. Just that glance, and he froze in place. Colin, Paula, my leg hurts. He panicked, cutting me off, speaking quickly, almost pleading. I had some guys beat up your parents. I was detained for several days and just got released on bail. My dad broke my leg, said if I keep going on like this, he'll cancel my inheritance and hand the company to my cousin. But I don't care about any of that. I only want you. You don't have enough ability. If Koo Group were given to someone else, maybe it could go further. Colin froze, his face stiff with embarrassment. It was the first time I had ever given him such a bluntly negative judgment of his person. I lowered my head and smiled, remembering how Gungchen once told me, dating isn't like grading papers, hold back your urge to criticize. Even if you go out killing and setting fires. You don't need to tell me. I don't care. Did you really think I had no way to retaliate against others? I simply don't want to. Bad times are already past. Bad relationships don't need to linger. That was true for me and my parents, and now, it's true for me and you. Colin, stop clinging. Colin collapsed back onto the sofa, drained. His leg hit an empty bottle on the floor, sending it clattering. After a moment of silence, he suddenly looked up at me, full of desperate hope. I don't believe it. You came here today. There must still be something in your heart you can't let go of. No. My tone was even more resolute than his. I came only to do my boss a favor. You once said such cruel things. Don't now pretend to be deep and affectionate. Who do you think you're performing for? Without looking back, I walked out of the Koo residence. Chapter 17. The day I broke up with Colin. I had a dream. In the dream, I was traveling with colleagues to a nearby city for a conference. On the way back, we encountered a landslide. In the middle of the night, a group of us stood stranded in the wilderness. Not knowing what to do, Colin appeared out of nowhere, carrying food and gear for warmth. Here, you must feel awful today. Drink this. He pulled a cup of 5 red soup from his coat and handed it to me. It's been poking me all the way here. Hurry up and finish it. Give me some peace. I held the soup, saw the painkillers he also offered. I remembered his recent proposal, and against all reason, I nodded. I do, Colin. I'm willing to marry you. When I woke, I opened the delivery app and ordered more than 30 cups of health soups, and scheduled a private doctor for a full checkup. Looking at the table full of soups I couldn't finish, I thought of that rainy night. Thankfully, I was no longer a child. Story 2. The day I was diagnosed with early-stage ductal carcinoma in situ, I called Eric 32 times on video. Roma, I'm busy. Can you stop already? The moment he hung up, Diana posted a status update, commemorating weaning day. Thank goodness for Uncle Eric being there. The photo showed her 2-year-old son biting his own nipple, while Eric held her and the child in his arms. Eric replied under the post, a pampered rose grows up. But Uncle Eric will always be here. I put down the CT scan from my prenatal checkup and gently touched my belly, then silently signed the consent form for a total mastectomy. After surgery, I suffered a threatened miscarriage. The first thing I did after stepping off the operating table was to send my application for studying abroad. Chapter 1. When Eric came home, I was reading the response to my application in my email. He was on the phone with someone, smiling faintly. The next moment, he caught a whiff of the chicken soup and furrowed his brows slightly. His gaze fell on me, and for a brief moment, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. You're not at work today? I put down the spoon. No, I had surgery. Eric gave a perfunctory nod, clearly not paying attention to my words. On the other end of the line, someone said something, and Eric patiently explained. Nothing important, just some trivial stuff. So this is what I had become after 7 years of marriage, trivial stuff. It wasn't until much later, after he hung up the phone, that his eyes finally landed on me. He walked toward me with a takeout box in hand. Diana's son weaned today. She specifically packed you a slice of cake. He handed it to me as if it were a favor. The cake inside the box was already a mess, the mangoes smeared together with the cream. I turned and walked to the bedroom. Eric grabbed my wrist, his voice tinged with irritation. All this fuss just because I didn't go to the hospital with you today? Suddenly, he seemed to touch something. His expression changed, and he released my hand as if it was burning. I looked down. It was the scar I got years ago when I saved him. 7 years had passed, and that scar no longer hurt, though it itches from time to time. Eric coughed awkwardly and softened his tone. Come on, eat something. You've always liked sweets, haven't you? I pulled down my sleeve, hiding the long scar on my wrist. I looked straight at Eric's face. I'm allergic to mangoes. A hint of embarrassment flickered across Eric's face. I'll take you to that restaurant you've always liked. He reached out to take my hand as he spoke. Before I could respond, Eric froze. He picked up a stack of papers from the coffee table. It was the surgical documents I hadn't had time to put away. He picked up the paper and murmured, "Total mastectomy." He glanced at it, stunned at first, and then a look of sudden understanding appeared on his face. He sneered. No wonder you kept calling me this morning. Roma, you forged a surgery report just to make me stay with you? He flung the report in my face. Diana's celebrating weaning day. Nurturing life is a noble thing. Why are you trying to imitate her? Pathetic. I took the surgery report from my face and was about to explain. I didn't. He interrupted impatiently. I'm Diana's uncle. She's the rose I personally raised. Stop targeting her. His words left me frozen. Eric assumed my silence means guilt. I took a deep breath and asked the question that had been buried in my heart for so long. Eric, is Diana's son yours? The moment my words landed, there was a loud crash. The chicken soup pot on the coffee table was overturned with a single swipe of his hand. He looked at me with utter disgust. Roma, you are. Absolutely revolting. Shards of porcelain scattered everywhere, cutting into my foot as I stumbled to the ground. The black chicken head in the soup stared back at me with half-closed eyes, mocking me like a clown. For the first time, a flicker of panic flashed in Eric's eyes. He was about to reach out to help me when an incongruous ringtone interrupted him. It was Diana's personalized ringtone. A flash of embarrassment crossed his face as he turned to answer the call. When he hung up, his expression was filled with unease. Something urgent came up at the office. I have to go. As he turned to leave, I grabbed his sleeve. Eric turned back to look at me. I forced a weak smile. Can you not go? Please don't leave. Eric, if you stay, I'll believe you. I'll believe you're just Diana's uncle, that you only see her as a junior. Our eyes met. He avoided my hand. You know I'm busy. His patience ran out as he pried my fingers off one by one. In the struggle, something fell from Eric's shirt pocket. I glanced at it and immediately let go. Eric seemed surprised by my sudden change in attitude, his tone softening. I'll be back before midnight. I promise. I struggled to stand, leaning on the floor for support, and pointed at the lace underwear lying on the ground, the one that wasn't mine, with a bitter smile. Then remember to take that back to the office too. Chapter 2. The clock ticked on, the hour and minute hands slowly overlapping, pointing to 12. I laughed at myself for holding on to even a shred of hope. Eric never kept his promises. Dragging my bleeding foot, I hailed a cab to the hospital, while waiting for my wound to be bandaged. I inadvertently saw a post Diana had made 2 hours earlier. Clearly it's 998 roses, but Uncle insists it's 999. Eric commented, because you are the most beautiful rose I've ever raised myself. I silently turned off my phone. I thought I'd feel bitterness, but all I felt was numbness. The nurse dressing my wound happened to be the same one who cared for me during my surgery last time. After bandaging my foot, she supported me, the genuine concern in her eyes far exceeding anything I'd seen from Eric. Where's your husband? You just had surgery. Lost the baby. Is he really that busy? I thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes. The next second, the door burst open with a loud bang. She got pricked by a rose thorn. Somebody, come and take care of it. Eric barged in, holding Diana in his arms. I looked at the nearly healed wound on her hand. At first, I froze. Then I laughed, pointing at him. I joked with the young nurse. See? I told you he's very busy. Eric's expression soured when he saw me. Roma, I said I'd come home, and I will. Why are you being so despicable? Following me here? I opened my mouth to respond, but Diana suddenly let out a soft gasp, struggling out of Eric's arms. Uncle, Roma just wants you to care about her too, she said, biting her lip. Why don't you take care of her instead? Eric gently tapped Diana's nose with an indulgent smile. No way. You've been fainting at the sight of blood since you were a kid. The normally stoic Eric pulled out a piece of milk candy from nowhere and handed it to Diana with a smile. You call me uncle, so I'll take care of you for the rest of my life. I couldn't help but laugh aloud. Attentive? He couldn't even remember that he just injured my foot. Careless? Yet he could recall Diana's childhood habits perfectly. The young nurse beside me couldn't hold back any longer. Supporting me, she blurted out, the patient needs post-surgery care. Before she could finish, Eric dragged her over to bandage Diana instead. I sneered, limping toward the door. On the way out, I didn't hesitate this time. I picked up my phone and hit confirm on my study abroad acceptance letter. Chapter 3. When Eric returned home in the middle of the night, I had already turned off the lights. The pain from the surgery always felt worse at night. A faint scent of roses filled the air as Eric leaned down over me. I frowned and turned my head away. He chuckled softly, leaning close to my ear. Roma, Diana's son is adorable. I want us to have a baby of our own too. Let's try again. He removed his clothes, his fingers brushing against me as he pulled at mine. I stayed motionless. The next moment, he froze. His hand had touched the layer of gauze on my chest. There was a moment of silence before he laughed bitterly in anger. He grabbed a pillow and threw it onto the floor. Roma, are you brainless? You cut off your breast just to show off because I took a weaning commemorative photo with Diana? He grabbed my wrist tightly. Fine. Anyway, You haven't been able to have kids all these years. Keeping it would have been useless. He slammed the door on his way out, leaving me in tears, my pillow soaked. Over the years, I'd struggled to get pregnant due to polycystic ovary syndrome. I had been undergoing IVF, and yesterday's hospital visit was supposed to be for a prenatal checkup. Instead, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I felt like I had failed my child. Enduring the pain, I got out of bed, unlocked my phone, and purchased a plot in the best cemetery I could find. The next morning, Eric, surprisingly, was still at home. 2 breakfasts were laid out on the table. I glanced at them but turned around and left. Since I had decided to study abroad, I needed to wrap up my projects quickly. Not getting the reaction he expected, Eric sat coldly at the table. Roma, for some reason, he hesitated. He pointed to a bouquet of roses beside him, his tone indifferent. "These are for you," I replied calmly. "I don't like roses." The petals were already starting to blacken. I looked directly at him and said coldly, "And I dislike second-hand roses even more." For a second, I wasn't sure what he saw, but a look of realization crossed his face. "So that's why you've been throwing tantrums these past few days. The company has a team-building event, and you want to come along too." I frowned, unable to figure out what he was talking about. He gestured toward my suitcase in the corner. "Your suitcase is already packed." "All right, do me a favor, and I'll take you. Design a dress for Diana. Her son's birthday party is tomorrow night. Diana wants to wear a dress you made." I stayed silent, and just as he was about to try convincing me further, I nodded slightly. "Fine." My uncharacteristic compliance caught Eric off guard for a moment. Then he pulled my hand toward him. "Roma, if you'd figured this out sooner, things would have been much better. I'm Diana's uncle. Taking care of her is my responsibility." I subtly avoided his touch and smiled faintly. "Yes, the rose you've personally cultivated deserves the very best." This comment seemed to please Eric. He pulled out his phone and tried to transfer money to me in front of my face. The spinning error icon was incredibly ironic. Message failed to send. He deleted me as a contact on the day he took the weaning photo with Diana. Awkwardness flickered across his face. In a panic, he took out his wallet, pulled out a wad of cash, and handed it to me. But in his haste, a photo fell out from a hidden compartment. The picture showed Diana and her child, looking blissfully happy, with Eric smiling gently at them. I picked up the photo and handed it back to him, speaking calmly. "No need. Consider it my wedding gift to you both." Chapter 4. The next day, just as I was leaving the cemetery, I received a text from Eric. "See you at 7:30. Attached was the location of the restaurant I had always wanted to try. The cemetery happened to be nearby. After a 10-minute drive and parking, I walked into the high-end private room in the back. Through the glass, I could see the intimate scene inside. Diana was holding her son, leaning into Eric's embrace, her eyes red. "Uncle, will there ever come a day when you grow distant from me?" Eric stroked Diana's hair, smiling indulgently. "You're the one I've raised myself. We're family." Diana's eyes reddened further, and her voice trembled. "But if Roma succeeds with IVF, once you have your own child, how could you still remember this family of ours?" Eric interrupted her. "Then I'll call Roma right now and tell her not to bother with IVF." He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed my number. Watching him, I felt dazed. The slip of paper in my hand with the cemetery address for the child was crumpled into a ball. Snapping back to reality, I felt my phone vibrate faintly in my pocket. I took a deep breath, pushed open the private room door, and smiled at the startled pair. "Were you looking for me?" Chapter 5. Diana was the first to recover, smiling as she took my hand. "Thank you, Roma, for making this dress for me. It's a bit loose, but I really like it." She paused, her face turning slightly red. "Uncle likes it too." My eyes fell on the clip at the back of Diana's dress. I had been working on that dress since starting my pregnancy preparations. I'd planned to wear it for a photo shoot with Eric once I got pregnant. Now it was nothing but waste. A perfect match for Diana, trash wearing trash. I walked straight to Eric and handed him the crumpled slip of paper. To my surprise, his lips curled into a sneer. He crushed the paper into a ball and threw it into the trash can. "If you have something to say, Say it. Diana isn't an outsider. Just as I was about to speak, Diana suddenly threw herself into Eric's arms, pushing me aside. Her red-rimmed eyes locked on the white flower pinned to my chest, and she began to sob. The next second, a loud smack rang out. Eric stood with his hand raised. His voice was low but laced with anger. Diana's son is turning 2 today. What are you doing? Dressed like this? He yanked the white flower off my chest and threw it to the ground, stomping on it until it was shredded to pieces. Then he gently shielded Diana's eyes with his hand. So unlucky. Are you doing this on purpose to disgust people? Supporting myself against the wall, I slowly stood up, shaking off the dizziness from his slap. The next moment, the restaurant's fire alarm blared harshly. Before I could react, Eric was already carrying Diana's son and dragging Diana out the door. He didn't spare me a glance the entire time. 5 minutes later, the alarm was deactivated. It had been a false alarm triggered by accident. I found Eric in the lobby on the first floor, standing amidst the crowd. A flicker of realization crossed his eyes. He probably thought I was worried about him getting hurt. Without a word, I pulled out a stack of papers from my bag and handed them to him. Sign these. Eric glanced briefly at the top sheet and sneered. A resignation letter? You're trying to threaten me by resigning? His glare was venomous. As you wish. With a cold smile, he signed each page, including the divorce agreement underneath. I turned to leave. Behind me, Eric's voice was full of fury. You just came here to make me sign this? I turned back calmly. What else? To stay for dinner? Eric's anger boiled over. Get lost. I immediately began looking up flights back to Haicheng. By the time Eric called me again, I was already at the airport waiting for my flight. I stared at his name on the screen before removing my SIM card and tossing it into the trash. Chapter 6. That same day, I returned home. Seeing my parents again felt like coming back to life. A week later, I was lying in bed, sipping the herbal medicine my mother had made for me. A message popped up. It was from my old high school classmates group chat. Class monitor, tomorrow night. Juno Hotel, class reunion. You can bring your partner. Since marrying Eric, I'd rarely kept in touch with my old classmates. I turned off my phone, deciding not to go. But the next evening, an unfamiliar number called. A familiar voice greeted me on the other end, making me frown slightly. Roma, it's been a week. You've had enough time to vent your temper. Come to the class reunion, and I'll forgive you. Eric was in Haicheng, too. Of course. I'd almost forgotten we were high school classmates. And this is how it all ended up. I hung up the phone and drove to the Juno Hotel. At the end of the hallway, I was about to push the door open when I heard voices inside. I'll bet 500,000 yuan that Roma, being so obsessed with Eric, will definitely follow his every word. With Roma's family background, being with Eric is already overreaching. Someone asked, Eric, how old is your child with Roma? Eric paused and replied coolly, I don't like children. Ha. A scoff came from the corner of the room. Only then did I notice the man sitting in the shadows. His slender fingers tapped rhythmically on the edge of the table. Sam? The last time I saw him was at my wedding, and I thought he had stayed abroad ever since. When did he come back? Sam stared directly at Eric. Don't like kids? Don't like being a father but love being the uncle? Chapter 7. Diana was Eric's Achilles heel. He wouldn't allow anyone to say anything bad about her. Sure enough, Eric's veins bulged in anger. The next second, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Eric turned to look at me. I gave Sam a slight nod as a greeting. For a brief moment, Sam's usually calm and indifferent gaze flickered with something, but he quickly suppressed it. Maybe it was my imagination, but I thought I saw the corners of Sam's mouth curl slightly. Eric adjusted his collar and, with a gentlemanly air, extended his hand toward me. Why are you so late? He sneered. See? If you'd behaved like this earlier, all that fuss wouldn't have been necessary. I ignored him entirely and calmly extended my hand. Eric was about to take it when I smiled gently, looking into his eyes. Then, using my thumb and forefinger, I forcefully slid the ring off his finger. Before he could react, I spoke. Sorry. I left in a hurry the other day. This wedding ring, which I personally designed, should be returned to me. His finger was left with red marks where the ring had been. I didn't give him a chance to speak. I took off my own wedding ring and, without hesitation, threw both rings into the trash can. Expired. Spoiled things belong in the garbage. Eric's face twisted in embarrassment. Roma, could you really bear to leave me? I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my email and handed him my phone. A Dutch university acceptance letter? Ignoring his confusion, I walked past him and approached the man who had just placed a bet on me. Standing before him, I extended my hand calmly. I'm here. You don't need to pay Eric the 500,000 yuan. Just transfer it to me instead. After all, we're divorced now. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sam's mouth curve slightly into a faint smile. It hadn't left his face since earlier. It was just like high school. He still had that silly smile. I was about to turn and leave when Diana suddenly stormed in from outside. Before I could react, she grabbed a glass of red wine from the table and furiously moved to throw it at me. Roma, do you have no shame? You're divorced and still clinging to my uncle. But the sticky wetness I expected never came. When I opened my eyes, a tall figure was standing in front of me. In a calm yet commanding tone, Sam gripped Diana's wrist. Looking her up and down, Diana pouted, looking aggrieved, and whined. Uncle! Sam raised an eyebrow. So, you're the one Eric has been raising? I see. Not impressive. Red wine dripped from his hair and trailed down his jawline, leaving crimson streaks. Suddenly, I remembered how, back in high school, whenever Eric's admirers bullied me, Sam would always shield me like this. I patted his hand reassuringly and stepped out from behind him. Reaching into my bag, I took out a set of keys and handed them to Diana. Here are Eric's house keys. Feel free to go there whenever you want. My voice was steady. I wish you both a lifetime of happiness. Before my words had fully settled, I grabbed Sam's arm and led him toward the door. The next moment, a loud crash echoed from the private room as a table was flipped over. Roma, you're unbelievable. Chapter 8. In the parking lot, Sam casually opened the door to his car. I'll take you home, he said. Sam leaned in to buckle my seatbelt, his warm breath tickling my neck. I sighed softly and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the car was already parked outside my house. Staring dreamily out the window, I said quietly, after all these years, you still remember where I live? He let out a bitter chuckle, murmuring to himself, I was afraid you'd get bullied. I walked you home every day. How could I forget? I froze in place as Sam got out to open the trunk. It's been a while since I came back to the country. These are for your parents. Box after box emerged from the trunk. Seeing my puzzled expression, he scratched his nose awkwardly. I glanced briefly at the contents, donkey hide gelatin, snow swallow nests. Letting out a light laugh, I said, my parents don't need blood-nourishing supplements. I suddenly leaned in close. Sam, this almost makes me think you came back to the country for me. Sam quickly put some distance between us. Don't flatter yourself. I've had some health issues and need to take time off to recover. I stared at him, unconvinced. With a resigned sigh, he began to explain. Your surgeon was a college classmate of mine. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy. I nodded. With Sam's supplements and my mom's herbal soups, I was feeling full of energy. It was perfect timing when a classmate messaged me, asking if I could do simultaneous interpretation for a foreign movie without Chinese subtitles. Following the address they provided, I arrived at an outdoor drive-in theater. Just as I was about to call to confirm, I heard the honk of a car behind me. A car rolled down its window, and there was Eric's face. The employer was Eric. Before I could turn away, he spoke. I signed a contract with your classmate. If you don't want them to pay a penalty fee, get in the car. When the movie started playing on the screen in front of us, I stood there, stunned, letting out a bitter laugh. I began translating every English line into Chinese for Eric. Suddenly, he hit the pause button. Out of nowhere, he said, Roma, no wonder you wanted to study abroad. It's your first time seeing this movie. Yet you can translate it so well. When did your English get this good? I hadn't heard Eric praise me in a long time. I used to feel happy about it. Now, I couldn't care less. Looking at his face, I spoke calmly. Eric, the The first time we met was at an English speech competition. Seeing his confused expression, I continued. My English didn't suddenly improve back then. If it weren't for staying to help you build your career, my dream was always to study further in Milan. He froze in place. I pointed at the screen. This movie isn't new to me, either. I've watched it 32 times. I've invited you 32 times. But every time you canceled on me because of Diana, I remember every line of this movie. I didn't want to keep entangling myself with him and moved to open the door to get out of the car. Eric grabbed my arm. Roma, why have you changed? My gaze was icy. Eric, who's really the one who's changed? Since Diana got divorced and came back, how many hours have you actually spent alone with me? Eric was silent, unable to say a word. Stop doing meaningless things. And, I added, frowning as I threw the bouquet of roses from the passenger seat at him. I don't like roses. I've never liked them. And you've never remembered. Chapter 9. Half a month later, I went to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. My recovery was going well. As I stepped into my home, I heard rustling noises. Just as I was about to call the police. You're back. Eric's voice rang out. I made a few dishes for you and your parents. Try them. Seeing that I didn't move, he looked a little unsure of himself. After a moment, as if remembering something, he pulled out a notebook and handed it to me. Roma, we've been together for 7 years. Don't let a few small things separate us. The notebook was the one I used to record the moments we shared. But as time passed, it grew thinner, the entries fewer and fewer. Roma, I know I forgot some things in the past, but I'm making up for it now. From behind him, he brought out a bouquet of jasmine flowers. You don't like roses. You like jasmine. I swatted the jasmine aside, refusing to answer. Eric, do you know the meaning of jasmine? Eric froze as I pulled out a single jasmine flower. To send jasmine means to implore someone not to leave. But now, I can't wait for you to leave. I threw the flower at him with force. Eric, you're a coward. Doing things that cross the line with Diana, how hard is it to admit you cheated? I was just, he tried to explain, treating Diana as a junior. Yes, just normal concern between friends. He reached out to grab my hand, just as I was about to shake him off. The next moment, Eric was sent sprawling onto the ground by a figure. Sam stood in front of me, holding a file bag. Eric looked up angrily. Sam? Then he pointed at me. No wonder you wanted a divorce. You two have been together all along. This time, I took a step forward. A loud slap rang out as Eric sat on the ground, his face full of disbelief. You hit me for him? What's your relationship with him? I smirked coldly and repeated the exact words he just said. Just like you said, normal concern between friends. Sam interrupted me. No, it's different. I didn't hear him clearly, so I asked again. Sam's expression was more serious than I had ever seen. He looked into my eyes. My feelings for you are not normal concern. They are emotions I've harbored for a long time. The entire room fell silent with that one sentence. Before I could react, Eric had already charged at Sam. With one swift kick, Sam sent him sprawling onto the ground. He threw the file bag at Eric. Eric, how can you even face her? It was only then that I understood my medical records had been left in Sam's car. The records scattered across the floor. Eric, furious, picked them up one by one. As he looked at them, his face turned pale, and his body began to tremble. Chapter 10. Pregnancy report? You were pregnant? I spoke calmly. It ended in biochemical pregnancy. Eric's eyes were bloodshot. Why didn't you tell me? Where is the child? I gave a cold laugh. Didn't I give you the cemetery address the day before I left? You didn't even look at it. Forgot? Why didn't you tell me? I coldly opened his social media account. 9 grid photos, one after another, all of him with Diana. Location tagged to the day of my mastectomy. I pointed at it. Eric took the phone, his angry expression turning to one of shock. The next second, he knelt down on the ground, mumbling to himself in despair. The day you called me 32 times. Sam spoke beside me. She and the child were fighting for their lives. And you? What were you doing? You were with your cherished Rose. Hearing this, Eric stumbled out the door, his expression vacant. Yes. What have I been doing? Chapter 11. The next time I saw Eric was on my mother's phone. I was hiding under a beach umbrella, taking off my sunglasses. On the screen, a man was bowing with every step, struggling to climb a steep set of stone steps. Blood stained his forehead. It was Eric. I frowned. He had always been a non-believer. Looking at the surroundings, I paused in shock. Mount Johua. I had been there too, alone as well. At the top, at the Tree of Wishes, I had tied a red knot inscribed with both my name and Eric's. In the video recorded by onlookers, voices of discussion rose and fell. This young man is truly sincere. Indeed. Over 3,000 steps. He started climbing at 5 in the morning. In the video, Eric was tightly clutching 2 talismans. I had prayed for those 2 talismans before, always believing that Eric kept his with him, until Diana told me, "Sister, that peace charm of yours, there's one just like it in our trash can at home." Maybe it was Uncle who threw it away. The discussions of the onlookers recording the video echoed. This young man is truly sincere. Indeed. Over 3,000 steps. He started climbing at 5 in the morning. The comments below rolled across the screen. One is a peace talisman, the other a death talisman, praying for peace for the deceased and blessings for the living. Looks like he's really obsessed. I felt a strange mix of emotions, and was just about to close the video. Suddenly, cheers erupted from the crowd on the screen. He made it to the top. I paused, stunned. The Tree of Wishes at the summit was still there. Eric was holding my diary, looking for something. He shouted without a care for appearances. Found it. I found the love knot. 2 red strings, worn with age, swayed loosely in the wind. Eric mumbled to himself, "If I tie it tighter, we can still be together." Just as he was untying it, a woman suddenly rushed out from the crowd, snatching the red string from Eric's hands. Without hesitation, she turned and threw my red string down the mountain, where it quickly disappeared in the wind. "Uncle, you've already divorced that woman. Why did you change the locks at home, and keep avoiding me?" "I had no choice but to come here and find you." She yanked at Eric. "I want to take you to see the master. You must be under a spell." Eric looked down at his empty hand, now only holding half of the love knot with his name on it. In that moment of stunned silence, he turned and slapped Diana across the face. "How dare you!" With that, Eric moved as if to throw himself down the mountain, only to be held back by the crowd. A woman nearby said loudly, "He worked so hard to find it, and she threw it away. What a lunatic." Diana raised her hand and slapped the woman who had spoken, but the other was unfazed. "I train in martial arts. Want to have a go?" With a slight effort, she grabbed Diana by the hair. Diana screamed, "Uncle! Uncle! Save me!" The woman eventually let go, pushing Diana in Eric's direction. Unexpectedly, Eric shifted slightly, causing Diana to fall flat on her back. "She calls you uncle, so your family. Take care of her." Suddenly, it was as if something snapped in Eric's mind. He kicked Diana hard. "Don't call me uncle." His voice was cold. "It's all because of you that Roma left." Diana sat on the ground, dazed. "Uncle, aren't we family?" Eric's eyes were icy. "Know your place. My family is only Roma and my deceased child." Chapter 12. Eric thought for a moment and dialed my number. I looked at the flashing number on the screen, took a deep breath, and pressed the answer button. "Roma, I know I was wrong. I've cut ties with Diana. Please, forgive me." He didn't give me a chance to respond, and continued, "I have something for you." Seeing that I wasn't answering, he quickly added, "Roma, haven't you always wanted to go to an island? I've already booked the soonest flight. I'll come to pick you up." At that moment, he suddenly paused. "Why do I hear the sound of waves on your side? Roma, where are you?" I raised my hand, gazing at the sky through my sunglasses, feeling the fresh sea breeze of the island. On the largest rock by the shore, there was silence on the other end for a moment. "I'm coming to find you right now." I laughed dismissively. "All right. I'll wait for you." Then I hung up. Before heading abroad to study, I finally had some time to take my parents on a trip. I didn't think much of Eric's call and went to the restaurant with my parents. However, early in the morning, a call from the police station woke me up. I arrived at the beach, still groggy from sleep. Several beams from flashlights were moving on the sand. Someone shouted, "Miss Roma is here now. You can come down." I walked closer, and a police officer grabbed onto me like I was a lifeline. "You're finally here." He's been here since noon and refused to come down even when the tide rose. He passed out from hypothermia in the evening, and a fisherman thought he was attempting suicide. He refused to come down with the rescue team. He insisted that we call you. The rescue team explained. Squinting, I looked ahead. For the first time, Eric looked this pathetic. In just a few days, he seemed to have aged, his eyes bloodshot. Seeing me, he instinctively reached out as if to grab my hand, but pulled it back. Exhaling, "Roma, I did as you said. I've been waiting on the largest rock for you." His voice trembled. "But now it's dark, and you didn't come. My phone ran out of battery, and I couldn't contact you. I was afraid you wouldn't find me, so I just stayed here. Luckily, you're here." He shoved both the peace talisman and the death talisman into my hands. Then, shivering, he pulled out a piece of paper. I took it. His voice quivered as he spoke. "Roma, there's really nothing between Diana and me. Look, this is the paternity test." I looked him in the eyes. "You don't need to explain, Eric." "I don't care." Eric froze in place. I spoke again. "How long did you wait?" Eric's eyes lit up for a moment, and he said happily, "I knew you still cared about me." "Not long, just half a day." His voice carried a hint of hope. I avoided his hand, which he had rubbed warm, and pulled my jacket tighter around me. Calmly, I said, "But Eric, I waited for a long time. Every time you stood me up for Diana, I waited with hopeful anticipation. I waited many days, many years." He seemed to realize what I was about to say, and began trembling. "Roma, please, don't say it." His voice was pleading. "I'm really tired." I spoke softly. "Eric, let it go." Turning away, I left. Eric remained standing on the beach, not knowing for how long. Back at the hotel, Sam pulled his anxious gaze away from the window. His face calm. "All sorted?" he asked. I answered, "Yes. Nothing to worry about." Sam let out a sigh of relief. Today was the last day of the trip, and it was time to say goodbye to Sam. "Sam, I'm leaving for abroad the day after tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye." Sam's eyes were dim, unreadable. "All right. Until we meet again." Chapter 13. As soon as I got home, I received a call from the hospital. I stood at the door of the hospital room, seeing Eric's leg swollen like a zonzi. The same young nurse who had helped me before was changing his bandages. That day we parted. He had been absent-minded and was hit by a truck. I was just about to go in and say goodbye when I heard a voice from inside. "It hurts so much. Do you think Roma's surgery hurt like this too?" The young nurse looked at him, expressionless. How could it? Eric let out a sigh of relief. But in the next moment, the nurse spoke up again. "She had a mastectomy and a dilation and curettage procedure. It's 10 times more painful than yours." Eric froze, and then, like a child, suddenly burst into tears. In the next moment, I received several large bank transfers to my account. Sender, Eric. Message, best wishes. I boarded the plane, watching the clouds outside the window. A familiar voice came from the seat next to mine. "What a coincidence. You're here too." My eyes flashed with surprise, and then I teased, "Didn't you say you were unwell and needed to stay in the country to rest?" Sam smiled gently. "Love heals all ailments." A smile played on my lips. "I heard some rumors. They say you had a crush on me for many years in high school." Sam smiled slightly, his expression serious. "Let me clarify." He tightly held my hand, his voice firm and sincere. "The rumor is true.